BLIX network. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. So we've got about 45 minutes together, and then we're going to go to Q&A. So what I'd love you to do is, as I'm going through and I'm kind of mentioning some things, if some questions are sparking up in your minds, please put them in the chat group and then I can get to them at the end. But obviously there may be some questions that you want to ask there. So think about the title of the session, The Power of Profile. So there's lots of things that are within your power, and raising your profile is definitely one of them. Now, one of the things that I would say, if you think about that word, mix it up with other words, reputation, personal brand. If I asked any of you to raise your profile, there may be an element of uncomfortableness that comes with that. Because more often it seems when we toot our own horn or shout about our successes, it's deemed as bragging or boasting. And we feel like, it feels a little bit uncomfortable. However, my question to all of you is, if we don't become comfortable in some way of being able to articulate our goals and our aspirations, our successes, what we're capable of, how will people ever know? And if people don't know, how can they open up doors of opportunity for you? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background of my story, and then I'm going to reflect on about 5 or 6 points that I think accelerated my own journey. Now, one of the things I would say is none of this is prescriptive. We are all different organizations, different backgrounds, different levels of comfortableness in kind of what I'm going to cover. So what I'd really like you to do is to take the bits that you can resonate with, mix it up and come up with your own model, something that works for you and something that feels authentic. And that may be just 1 or 2 of my points that you come away, and which is my ultimate goal, that at the end of our hour together, you're going to come away with some sort of plan that says, you know something, I need to do this or I need to do that. So for those of you who are just on the journey in terms of the world of work, this is stuff that is great for you to do to accelerate your careers. For those of you that are kind of slightly longer in the working journey, this is a little bit of a nudge in the ribs to say, come on, let's not forget to do some of this stuff for a number of reasons. Firstly, the next generation are watching, right? So we have to kind of be the leaders that we want them to be. So, and the second reason is that, regardless of where we are in our careers, there's still that 20% of our time that we need to think strategically around what comes next. And I'll go into a little bit more detail. So I'm just going to share my slides with you. So just bear with me a sec. There we go. I can just get to that button and stop my sidebar. Okay, can everyone see that? Just give me a little nod. Hope so. So just in terms of what we're going to cover, I say a bit about my own background, kind of validates why I'm here to kind of give you the advice that I'd like to give you. We're going to talk about the imposter syndrome, that little voice in the back of our heads that sometimes tells us we don't belong in the rooms that we're in. We're going to get that. We're going to kick that one right out. None of us are imposters, but I'm going to talk to you about how that can sometimes make us feel, how it can prevent us from taking risks, and how it can kind of stop us in our tracks by talking us out of the good things that we should be doing. We're then going to look at you and your personal brand. So who are you? Who shows up? What behaviors do you exhibit? What do we need them to look like? Again, I'm a big believer that you can be a leader long before you run a team. It's about kind of what you exhibit when you're in the workplace. We're then going to look at your digital footprint. I can't always meet you. We can't meet each other, but I can Google you and I can look you up online. What story is that Google search telling me? What breadcrumbs and footprints are you leaving behind that's formulating your digital story? The next thing is around building relationships. So it's great to have a network, but how do we take that network to the next level? Why should we be networking? What is the benefits? What's the time investment? So we're going to have a look at a little bit of that. Then we're going to think about those relationships. How do we turn those into people that can move our careers forward? So mentors, sponsors, advocates. Think of a little army of champions in different rooms, putting your name into hats for opportunities. How do we create that army? And then finally, we'll talk about giving back. This is the good citizenship piece, the bit that we should all be doing because we're good people and we want to be in the society that we all want to see. But not only is it the right thing to do, but you can gain a hell of a lot of skills as a consequence of doing the right thing. So we're going to talk about that and then we'll go into Q&A. So first of all, a little bit of history from me. So my background, and believe it or not, even like when we talk about the power of profile and talking about yourself, regardless of the fact I've done this 600 times, it still feels uncomfortable, right? So it never goes away, but you have to kind of check yourself in the background and say, I need to set the context and the scene as to why you guys should be listening. So my background, 25 years, financial services, banking, investment managers, insurance, all different kind of financial industries, up to COO level. About 13 years ago, I was sitting at my desk in a very large, one of the biggest large investment managers. And I looked around the board table that I was about to walk into, and it was full of men, and I was the only woman. And don't get me wrong, these men were fantastic. They were my champions, they were my support group, but my challenges were different to theirs. And I kind of got to thinking, how do I get more women in this room? How do I get more diversity in this room? What could I do? What could I create off the side of my desk? So my initial vision was around how do I help women? So I decided to create a website of resources that would give women access to networks, events they could attend, inspirational stories. Now, back 13 years ago, diversity wasn't even a term. Gender was on no one's agenda. So that website, in journalist terms, was a slow news day. In other words, there was one story every 2 weeks. Not like today when we open up the newspapers and it's full of kind of gender headlines and, a push for gender parity. So over the 7 years, I run that project off the side of my desk by doing my day job. And if I'm completely honest with you, my love of banking after 25 years was getting smaller, not of technology, I might add. And my love of all things gender and inclusion was getting bigger. And there comes a point in your life where you have to follow your purpose, regardless of the risks that come with it. So I decided to give up the big job that I've always wanted and focus on We Are the City full time. So today, if you join up the community of We Are the City and We Are Tech Women, which is a similar kind of website, provides resources, there's about 160,000 people that are part of that. We push out news stories, events, campaigns, volunteering opportunities, jobs, all sorts of things, webinars, and it's all free. So please do go and have a look and sign up to that. We have awards where we shine a spotlight on the talent below director level. We run conferences. So, for example, we have a very large Women in Tech conference coming up, and men are welcome to attend, coming up at the start of May, where we're talking the front to back of tech. We do things like when we can get together in person, we have quarterly events that are attended by all of our previous award winners that we host in lots of different buildings. So again, kind of look out for them as we come out of lockdown and back into the real world. Gender Networks is a really interesting one. I've been running this forum for 12 years, and it brings together the heads of women's networks within corporate firms. So there's 95 companies associated with that. And we share best practice because we're all after the same goal. And that's not about disempowering men, it's about equal representation in the room. So the book came as a consequence of I was coming up to the age of 40. I wanted to leave a little bit of a legacy behind. So I decided to write a book, a bit of the story I'm going to tell you now, and 13 chapters of tips. So the second book will be coming. It's probably going to be out next year. Once the conference is done, I'm actually going to start to finish it. So start to finish, that makes no sense. I'm actually going to finish the book. So you can expect that autumn 2021, potentially 2022. So the OBE was fantastic from, everything that I kind of built in my corporate career to go to Buckingham Palace, meet Prince Charles and be able to take my family, especially when you look at kind of my beginnings, it was a very, very special day. And if anything, the awards and stuff like that were amazing. However, it's one of the things that spurred me on to create my own awards, because it's easy to give out awards to senior people. Once you get one, the others follow. But what was happening with the pipeline? How could I shine a spotlight on people that had perhaps not got to director level, young superstars, perhaps people in their 50s and 60s that just hadn't worked for the right individual or the right company, but they were out there and they were doing their thing. So Rising Stars and Tech Women, I think there's around 950 of those individuals that have been recognised through those awards. And we don't just give them the awards, we support their careers thereafter with partnerships with Durham University, Oxford SED, Chartered Management Institute. So look out for them. If you're in tech, they open in August. Rising Stars open in January. And if you follow me on social media, next week we announce our Rising Stars shortlist. So all of our kind of social feeds will be full of that as we highlight 200 incredible women across a multitude of industries. So outside of work, I'm a working mum. Both my kids were under 5 at the kind of height of my career. They're now 18 and 20 and, young women and campaigners in their own right. I sit on a number of boards, work in a number of schools, and I'm a global mentor. So I have what I call a very portfolio career. I'm either speaking, running my companies, trying to give back through various charity initiatives. But when you do a job that you love, it doesn't feel like work. So I'm going to take you back now to kind of where life began. And one of the first things that I would say is I'm very, very proud of my background and where I came from. It was something that I hid when I first kind of came to the city, but something that was given away by my accent. So I grew up in the East End of London, a very trendy place to live now, but not so much when I lived there. So the area that I come from, it was Hackney. Again, I'm very proud, Hackney born and bred. And that tower block that you can see is where I live with my mum in Hoxton, which is even more trendy, but not so much at the time when I lived there. So I started work at 11 when you could go and get a Saturday job. There was just me and my mum. So 2 incomes were better than one. So the thoughts of going to college or university, it would have been a no for me for a number of reasons. One, from a cost perspective, but secondly, when I was about 14, things were going on in my personal life and I kind of checked out of school. It was only when I checked back in at 15, I had a bit of a hard year even to come out with the GCSEs that I come out with. But I done my best. But I had big dreams and passion. And to be honest with you, despite what my careers officers were telling me about girls don't work in banks and I'd never get a job up in the city, I decided to get on the bus and try it anyway. So I went to every single bank in Liverpool Street. If any of you kind of live around that area or ever been to that area, it's the financial district of London. And the big pubs and restaurants that we see today were physical banks where you'd go in and there was real people and you'd get an application form and you'd fill it in and you'd give it back. And invariably for me, the answer was always a no. And it was a no for, I think, for a number of reasons. And some unfortunately still exist today. There was an element of unconscious bias, or more conscious, I would have thought, around where I grew up, my academic record, my accent. I didn't fit the mold, the conventional mold of a bank. However, there was one bank that was taking in a cohort of their normal graduates and people from colleges in internships. And they decided back then to take a couple of kids from the local trouble school, of which I was one. So I got to go and work in the very bank that I could actually see from my bedroom window. So NatWest Tower was the only tall building in the city at the time. It's not like it looks like now. But I got to go and work in the very bank that I could see. And it was great. I was the first one in the family to ever kind of get a job like that. And everyone was really proud of me. However, within that bank, I hit a situation that I didn't know how to deal with. Or I did know how to deal with it, as in where I grew up. If somebody demonstrates bad behavior or says something that you're not particularly happy with, then you would call that behavior out. I didn't really realize at 16 there was probably a more tactful and diplomatic way of doing it. So it wasn't so much that they fired me, they just wanted to relocate me 200 miles. I kind of got the impression that my career was never going to flourish at that bank. And I learned a valuable lesson there. I learned about resilience because I thought my world was over. I had to go back to my family and say, actually, I lived up to the stereotype that they'd given me, and I lost the job. It was a difficult thing, but I knew I had to bounce back. The world wasn't over. Someone somewhere was going to give me a job. I also learned a lesson about tact and diplomacy because throughout my career, there will be opinions I don't agree with and people that will press my buttons. And I needed to learn how to deal with that in the right way because I was just young at that point. As you get older, you get more confident in your opinions and you learn how to do that. But at that time, it definitely wasn't a strength of mine. However, I did manage to get another job and I went to work in a technology company. So you think this was a long time ago, right? This was like 30 years ago. PCs were just going into the city. You had people that wouldn't even switch them on. They felt around computers are the same way that we look at AI technology now. It's going to come and eat everyone's jobs. There was one gentleman, my job, I used to go in every morning and switch his PC on. And then I'd go back at 5:30 and switch it off because he refused to touch it because one day it was going to make his job obsolete. So it's interesting to see how that mindset worked. But my job in this organization was a receptionist and behind me was the training department because obviously shipping all these PCs in, they needed to know how to use them. So she was exceptionally busy booking people onto, and some of you are probably too young to even remember, like DOS-based programs long before we had mice and stuff like that. But early Windows, Windows 3.1. But we was teaching people how to use that. And I used to really watch her work. She was always so busy. And I've always been one of these individuals that will help someone out to get their work done. If we both work together and collaborate, we can both get out the door at a decent time. So I always used to kind of go and help her. So when she had a head count, it was that help and putting my hand up to kind of do whatever she needed doing led her to give me a job. Over the next 18 months, I shadowed her, I watched her. I've always been a big people watcher, especially when it comes to leaders, working out what bits I can take to make up the leader that I want to become, but also sometimes what bits I wouldn't want to do. So I studied her and I watched how she dealt with conflict, how she dealt with pressure, how she negotiated, how she influenced. And over that period of time, I learned enough to feel I could go and do her job. It was the natural next step, but somewhere else. And I joined Reader's Digest. So for those of you who don't know Reader's Digest is, it was a magazine. It was a way ahead of its time. It had all sorts of interesting stories. It actually came out the US. But I went to join them to organise training to move all of their guys onto kind of computers and email systems. And whilst I was there, one of the trainers went sick. So my job was to manage the training schedule. And I said to my boss, I can teach that. It's open a window, close a window. It's not difficult. And he said, well, Vanessa, go ahead. And he goes, and in the world of work, and this advice kind of stuck with me throughout my entire career, you fall into two camps. You either make the company money or you save the company money. Always operate as if that company money is your own and that you're in a recession. So he was telling me to be stingy, basically. But when you think about it, Reader's Digest were in a recession. The internet was coming in at this point and people had stopped buying magazines. So I took him at his word and I self-taught myself Excel and Word. And eventually I trained what was left of the program, saving the company quite a bit of money. At that particular point, voluntary redundancy came up. As I say, the company was in trouble because of what was going on with the internet. And I took voluntary redundancy. It was £5,000. It's a lot of money, even these days, and I took that redundancy money and I set up my own company at 21. Now, I set up a training company. I was the one asset of the company, managing director of myself. I was training about 22 different applications. I started to program a little bit. I'd done some desktop support. So I was kind of going more up that tech route. And I run the company for about a year, but I had no business acumen whatsoever. So for example, I'd get called to do a training session in Edinburgh and I would go up to Edinburgh to do it, rather than putting a local trainer in Edinburgh to provide the training calls, put a 20% markup and make money sitting in my living room. I never had that kind of business nous at the time. So I realized after a year, especially when I got a letter from the tax man, who was he and what did he want with my money, to realize that I wasn't grown up enough to run a business. So I ran back to corporate. And at this particular point, I joined a large pharmaceutical company, rather the one that's out of the finance sector. And I was doing a little bit of everything, a little bit of training, and I was traveling quite a bit to their regional offices and abroad, and a bit of desktop support. And I'm going to bring this individual in just because there's a point that I want to make. So there was a gentleman that done exactly the same job as I did. And I thought he was quite cute. So I used to pull the leads out the back of the laptop and the kit in the training rooms, and I'd log a help desk call for him to come and fix them. And after about the sixth time of him coming down, he said, is there something you want to say to me? And I was a lot younger and particularly bold at that point. And I said, I'm not being funny. Is there something you want to say to me? Anyway, we married. So 23 years later, father of my children. But the reason I bring him into the conversation is over the next 2 years, his career massively accelerated at pace. Now, there may be an assumption, was it because he was a man and I was a woman? It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with how we operated at work and where we put our priorities. So I honestly thought by being busy, that would get me promoted and the pay rise that I wanted. Whereas his mode of operandi was, I get my work done, I work hard, but I will go to every single internal event that's going on in the organization. I would go to anything external. And lo and behold, what he was building was something I was never going to have whilst I was busy at my desk. He was building a network. And he was also, through that network, having the opportunity to articulate what he wanted to do in his career, the department he wanted to run in London, what he would do with it, how he would save money. Did I have stories like that? I probably did. But who was I talking to? My computer. Because I thought by going to these events, it would look like I had free time. So he did end up running the department that he wanted in London. He grew the network, he grew the sponsorship, and he still swears to this day on someone's org chart that I work for him, although I'm having none of it. But his career continued at pace where I became what I call trapped in the doing. There was no strategic thinking around where my career was going, who I needed to network with, what skills I needed to obtain. Just this mindset of if I work hard enough, someone will tap me on the shoulder. And it doesn't work like that. Despite my model of not networking, I still managed to jump a lot of jobs. My strategy was to stay at companies for 2 years, do some interim contract positions where I wasn't necessarily involved in the politics, because some of the work that I did was quite tricky, kind of people management decisions. So it's easier to be kind of emotionally disconnected from some of that stuff. And the reason I jumped jobs was financially driven. So I knew that if I hung around in a company for many, many years, those pay increases will become smaller unless, you had a bigger promotion or it was more structured. So that was kind of my choice. But when I got to kind of my early 30s, I decided to stay and kind of go up the promotion route. So that was my particular strategy. So I got to this particular point where I jumped about 6 different banks, carved out a bit of a niche on supporting senior leadership teams as they made large transformation, big scale infrastructure changes, decoupling infrastructures and technology systems from other companies. And it was a great place to watch and learn and watch those C-suite senior leaders in terms of how they operated. And I kind of played the part of let's get stuff done. You guys can talk, but I'm going to take that out of the room and get it done. There is nothing like a branding element of being a safe pair of hands. So if ever you get given that one, own it. It's a really good role to have. But I got to the point in my career after a number of different transformations where if I'm honest with you, I felt a little tired. I felt like I needed something else to reignite my passion. And that's when I created We Are the City. But as I started looking around my desk and looking around the room, thinking, what does that mean for me? I realized that I needed a plan. One of the things I'd also neglected while I was doing the doing was this more strategic plan about what my career needed to look like. Again, who I needed to connect with, what skills I needed to hone. What was my boss's job that perhaps I aspired to? What did it look like out there, up there? How was I going to get there? And I looked around my room for people that could help me and realized my network was who was in the room. It was people that come to me off the back of my boss. It was people that come to me to get stuff done. The people that I needed weren't actually in my office. They weren't in my room. I realized that I had to put some effort in. I had to go to events internally, but also externally to build that network. Now I was time strapped, 2 young children, traveled a lot with my job. When I'm going to events, I need to know that A, I'm going to learn something. That was a priority for me. And that B, that I was going to network with like-minded individuals, that I was come away feeling inspired, having ideas. So I was quite strategic at first with what events that I went to, but I was also researching for We Are the City because I had a rule. I didn't want to put anything on We Are the City that I hadn't checked out myself. It also got to this particular point where I started to look at who I was, and I didn't necessarily like the reflection. So I'd very much become, pinstripe suits, even to the point my hair, I mean, it's straight today because I actually got my roots done at the start of the week, but normally my hair is very, very tight, curly. And years ago, someone said to me, "You'll have to calm that hair down, Vanessa. You'll never get ahead with that hair. It's too wild." And it is quite liony, if I'm honest. However, it shouldn't matter what my hair looks like. It should be about what's in my head. And it shouldn't matter that every day I turn up in a pinstripe suit because that's the armor that I choose to wear. I should be working for a company that would recognize me if I turned up in a bin bag, with my hair all curly. So I went through this big transition around who am I and who's the company that I want to work for that lets me be authentically me, because that's the way that they'll get the best out of me if I can just be myself. Then I started thinking about, okay, if I can't meet everyone, what's this digital footprint? And at the time, LinkedIn had just come in. And I remember, embarrassed to say it, but I remember saying to someone, oh, that's not got any legs. That won't last. People won't be bothered with that. And yet here we are, however many years later. And LinkedIn is the go-to place when you look people up, from a work perspective. Other things down the right-hand side, speaking events. I can't tell you how many times I passed up the opportunity to speak through fear, through imposter syndrome. So again, thinking about maybe I should have taken those opportunities. Things like mentoring. When I look back, I remember there was a senior lady, similar role to me in another area of the business. And we were the only women. And I used to kind of think to myself, why she not reached out? Or, why why is she not offering to help me? I was a lot younger at the time. And then I thought to myself, have I asked? Have I reached out to her to ask her for advice? There's probably loads she could teach me. But I had this silly notion that the fact that I had, a grand job title and a few people working for me, that I was supposed to know it all. When I realize now that that journey, continuous learning, we never know it all. Even at a C-suite level, we should always be learning. So other things like giving back, this was the biggest realization. Why I was busy doing the doing, realizing that the people that worked for me were watching me. What they were seeing was a slight workaholic, someone that never networked, and someone that wasn't doing her bit to nurture future talent. And that appalled me. I should be demonstrating the behavior of a leader that I want the people that work for me to follow. My succession planning. So big kind of realizations. So there's the story. I'm going to leave that piece there, but I'm now going to reflect on some of the other things that kind of came into play. Now, the first thing is the imposter syndrome. Now, some of you may have heard of it. Sometimes people say, oh, this, it's a big thing with women. I don't believe that. I think I don't think it's wide particularly to women. So let me see if you recognize it. It is that feeling of being in the room and thinking that you don't know as much as everyone that's there. It's this impeccably high bar that we set for ourselves, that we must know everything, achieve everything to add value to any conversation or any project. And the thing is, when that imposter syndrome kicks in, it can surface in so many different ways and it can have so many different effects. So, what I'm going to give you now is not to solve that imposter syndrome, but just to acknowledge that sometimes that little voice in the back of your head that sits on your shoulder or whispers in your ear, what if you can't do that? That's what it is. And sometimes it's good, it keeps you humble. And you're like, thanks for that little warning, but I'm going to crack on and take this risk anyway. So, let me tell you how it kind of can surface sometimes. So, thinking of you're going to be found out, I remember getting a job once from one of the banks, and I remember getting the offer letter in, and it had the salary on it. And in hindsight, now it wasn't a fantastic amount of money, but it was to me at the time. And I remember saying to my husband, that's a typo. Why would they be paying me that money? I'd already devalued myself. I was like, I'm going to go there and HR are going to tap me on the shoulder and say, come on, out you go. You was dishonest. You should have owned up. I was convinced. Other things, not taking credit for your work. Now, I can't tell you how many teams I've run where I've paid someone a compliment and what I've heard back. So say, for example, I say to someone, that was a fantastic piece of work that you did there. Well done. What I hear back from the individual was, oh, it wasn't me. It was this person and this person. It's like an Oscar winning BAFTA kind of speech about everyone else that delivered this piece of work other than yourself. So let me talk to you about that, because that's great. Giving credit where credit due, fantastic. But if you've delivered something and you've worked on it, the right answer to that is thank you. Take it, accept it, as uncomfortable as it may feel. And the reason being, if you keep giving away your hard work, your deliveries to all these amazing people, and again, you can credit them in other ways. Say, for example, two people in the organization talking about giving you an opportunity. And that person that thanked you turns around and says, oh, didn't that person do a fantastic piece of work? Or the other person said, didn't that person do a fantastic piece of work? And the person that thanked you said, no, it wasn't them. It was this person, this person, this person, because that's all they've heard. So my point is, sometimes when you get that credit, take it. Don't feel guilty. If you've put your heart and soul into a delivery, you own that. And also, when you go into your mid-year reviews and end of year reviews, what are you going to talk about? The fact that your project, this person, that person delivered it. That end of year, that mid-year is about you and your deliveries. So if you've been saying throughout the year, it wasn't me, you can't go in there and claim that. So just think about that, some of the things that you deliver. Other things, not about taking risks. So for example, that imposter syndrome, say you was offered a job in another department. That imposter syndrome may say to you, why would you want to do that? Why do you want to change jobs? You know everyone over here. It's comfy, it's warm, you get things done. Why do you want to go over there? You'll be the new person, you'd have to learn again. And that horrible kind of notion, what if I fail? But what if you fly? So that's kind of the things, again, this imposter syndrome. Just know that it's there. It's always going to be this little voice, lack of confidence, call it what you will, in the back of your head, but don't let it prevent you from taking that step ahead, from taking that risk. Nothing is achieved in any aspect of life without a certain amount of risk. It's how you mitigate that risk and how you think about what happens if it went wrong. So to finish that imposter syndrome, none of you got to where you are by accident. the exams you pass, the jobs that you've got, the people you are, and the value that you bring. So it's a shoulders back moment. Be proud of how far you've come. It's an achievement in itself. One of the things I want to pick out here is around comparison. Comparison is a killer. It's a thief of joy, right? When we compare ourselves to other people, everyone brings different value. And I remember I used to wax lyrical to one of my bosses. Part of my job as of head of business management was to read a number of leadership management reports and see them up into an executive summary that used to go to the board, where the executive can make a decision on the basis of my summary. The guy that I used to work with could read these reports in a nanosecond, scan, read, write his report. He was done within a couple of hours. I was still there at the end of the day. Oh, they need to know this and they need to know that. And I used to spend half of my one-to-one time comparing myself to the guy that done it really, really well and saying how rubbish I was. What was that about? Well, I wasn't in there to talk about that individual, you know? So just think about that comparison. And I remember my boss saying, everyone brings different value. And if you think of it a bit like, a pie, everyone does a different slice of the pie. And as long as we get a whole pie as a team and we get stuff done, that's all we want to do. So think about that. Imposter syndrome, it's there. We know it. We acknowledge it. Thank you for keeping me humble, but shoulders back, proud. I'm going forward. And the reason I need this out of the room is because we're going to look at personal brand. And personal brand attracts a certain amount of self-awareness when we look at kind of who we are, who shows up. So think about that. Big question. Who are you? What do people see? That's the first component part. Some research done a good few years back around it takes people 7 seconds to make up their mind whether they like you or not. A lot of that is down to your unconscious bias. Do you look like me? Do you sound like me? Do we immediately have things in common? Are we in this room for the same reason? But it's what people see. That's the first thing, first impressions. Shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is. The next thing is what people say. So say, for example, I've walked in a room, I look around the room, I see people who look a bit like me. It's a mirror image. It's a safe space. I'm gravitating over there. The next thing is what comes out of the person who I'm meeting, what comes out of their mouth, what I hear. That's going to validate I made the right decision. I like what you're saying. So say, for example, you had 30 seconds to articulate who you are. We get split up and I go on to someone else and say, oh, I was just talking to, let's call the person Joe. I was just talking to Joe. They were telling me where they work, the project they're working in, what they're interested in. At that particular moment, I have your brand right here in my hand, based on our first interaction and what you told me. So as I'm talking to this other person, I'm talking about Joe. The other person says, I don't know who that is. I've never come across that person. They sound quite interesting. And I'm going to look them up. So they start to look you up and they can't find anything about you on LinkedIn, or there's a very kind of basic profile where you talk about your company and how many people it's got and where you're domiciled. I'm going to look on some other social media channels. Oh, I'm going to go and have a look over there. Oh, I can find someone like that. Oh, yeah, there's someone on Twitter called that. Oh, there they are. Or they're having a real kickoff because their package hasn't arrived. So social media is giving me a different side to what I've articulated. And that goes to my last point. We never used to have to worry about this, what people read. But every single day, whether you're on social media or not, there are digital footprints that we are leaving behind. Crumbs, people tagging you into photos, people asking for your opinion, sharing your opinions. So your brand is very much what people read as well. There's another way of looking at your personal brand, more of a formulaic view. What are your strengths? So what are the things that what you're good at? Forget this weakness side. Nobody has weaknesses. We just have preferences in terms of what we're good at and what we're not. I also think that far too much time is spent on weaknesses, as opposed to playing to our strengths. So what are your strengths? What are your passions? You know what your passions is. If you think about your work, the things you do first are the things that you're passionate about. Less so sits on a pile called procrastination. Am I the only one who does that? Leaves the things we don't like to the really last minute? When, if anything, they're the things that you should do first. Something around eating your frogs for breakfast, look it up. Other things, core values. Who are you? What's the foundation? What's your structure? To quote a favorite musical of mine, what do you stand for? What do you fall for? But ultimately, it goes back to my original point. It's your behaviors. It's what people see. You can have the best brand statement in the world, but people are visual. They will judge you on your behaviors. Now, we can take that in a negative way, or we can take it in a positive way. As I said to you earlier on, I believe you can be a leader long before you run a team. It's about the behaviors that you exhibit. So when we think about behaviors, characteristics, if I asked any of you the question, if you had to pick 3 words out of this list that sum up your personal brand, what would they be? If you just have a look at that list, and again, it's just to whet your appetite, what do you think sums you up? So they're the behaviors that you feel you're exhibiting, or the characteristics or brand descriptors, call them what you will. Now, what happened if I asked your boss? What do your boss see? Do they see those things? Do you do work or demonstrate delivery in a way that mandates some of those characteristics and behaviors? What if I asked your peer group, people that you work with, what do they see? What do people see outside of work? And we'll talk about that dual brands in a sec. Because as I said, I think you can be a leader long before, you have a fancy job title or you run teams or large P&Ls. If I ask you now to think about somebody a leader that you aspire to, could be someone that you work with, could be someone in college or school, could be someone externally, could be a celebrity, leader. Who are they? What behaviors do they exhibit? So if I had to think of a leader for me, it has to be someone who is passionate. I've got to buy into their work. I want to be excited to be on the journey. I've got to have someone who's innovative, comes up with ideas, nothing that we can't do, and I need somebody who's also very motivated. So they're just 3 that I would, there's other things, integrity, that I would pick out. So when I think about the things that I aspire to be, or any of you aspire to be from that kind of leadership role model, what's to stop you adopting some of those behaviors now and demonstrating them? So you see my point here. We don't have to wait till we're given responsibility to act like a leader. We can do it today in everything we do, in every decision we make, in every reaction that we have. So just think about that. Who shows up? What are those behaviors? Couple of exercises you can do. Brand statements, who are you? What are your strengths? So you make sure that we're playing to them and we demonstrate them in the behaviors and the things that we do. What are you passionate about? There needs to be some of that in the world of work. I got through my last few years in corporate by bringing in things around diversity and inclusion and gender, because that's what kept me alive. That was where my passion was. And to have that alongside my day job made it more palatable, like towards the latter years. What are your core values? Who are you? And how do you demonstrate it? It goes back to my point about what people see. So another thing, just to finish on that, there's a brand statement example. You'll get a copy of these slides. You can have a look. But here's mine. My strengths: inspiring, motivating people. I get things done. I mentioned this at the beginning, not a bad label to have. Everyone needs a doer in their organization. I love connecting people, seeing the magic happen. What am I passionate about? Gender, next generation, diversity and inclusion, core values. Honesty has got me into trouble in the past, but it's who I am. I want to be my authentic self. How do I demonstrate it? By the things that I bring, the things that I get involved in, the things that support my passions and light my fires, as it was. So in terms of brand, keep it real. I remember being offered a job where my brand would have absolutely had to change, a very cutthroat environment where I would have had to make decisions. And I was tempted for a nanosecond. And then I thought to myself, how long can I keep that up? Because it's not truly who I am. Things about dual brands. People say, oh, I'm this person inside of work and I'm this person outside of work. I don't believe it. I think social media has closed that gap. It used to be, 6 degrees of separation? I think something like now it's about 3. So just think about that. Who shows up? What are those behaviors? If they're real and authentic, they're going to show up to your friends, to your peer groups, to your bosses. Aware of the negative. There's always going to be a flippant comment that someone makes about your work in a room, and that travels and it becomes part of the brand. You're part of your personal brand. You just have to think how we mitigate that. How do we turn that around? How do we react to that kind of quickly, so that we can turn that element around? It's just something for you to think about. So moving out of brand, if you think where we've been, no imposters here. Personal brand, let's start to think about who we are. Now, what about online? Because I'm going to look you up. Anybody Google themselves? Perhaps it feels like a little bit of a dirty secret. Oh, let's have a Google. If you Googled me 10 years ago, one of the things you'll see is that I was a runner, a really bad runner that used to finish the races when everyone was packing up and the cakes were all sold and everyone was going home. But that was my story. So I purposely started adding to blogs, commenting on things and building up a story on on Google to what I wanted to see. So if people looked me up, they knew that I was passionate about, they knew that I was a speaker, they knew that I run my other city. So think about that story that you create, because people will look you up. Now, the first place I'm going to look you up and I want to find you and I want to find your story is on LinkedIn. And people go onto LinkedIn and then they kind of half bake a story in the summary area that tells people nothing. So here's an example. I'm a project manager at an investment bank. And then I talk about all the different geographies that the bank's in, how many staff they've got. That's fine, that's great. But I can look that up. I want to know about you. How about if I wrote, I'm a project manager at an investment bank with £100 million portfolio of change across 6 geographies involving 600 people. Said job has gone from here to here. And even if you're not in that kind of big role, who do you work for? If you work for somebody that's running a large P&L, that's running a large leadership team, that's flying all over the world, and you're helping to make that happen, don't underestimate your contribution to that person being able to do all of that stuff. Articulate it. I support a leadership team that are responsible for this. My job involves that, that. Now, some of you might not be able to do it from a confidential standpoint, but when you write on your LinkedIn summary, you are allowed to brag and boast. That's what it's there for. If you don't feel comfortable, write it in the third person. Get someone, if you look at it and it's almost cringing, you're probably round about where it needs to be. And also bounce it off of someone else, let them have a look at it. Key rules of LinkedIn, people buy people, they want to see your headshot. My husband used to commit the cardinal sins of headshots. It had half of his friend in it on his picture. It was really blurry and it had the worst wallpaper in the background. He was a managing director, he should be having, a clear image. Put your job titles in from an SEO perspective. So how search engines work. Put the keywords in the top where your job titles are, and in the summary area if you want to be found. So I would have lots of different job titles in there: chief of staff, program director, project manager. I wanted to be found, so I used the keywords. Now, I always had a rule with LinkedIn that I wouldn't connect with anyone that I met, which kind of went out the window last year. So if I'm more than happy to connect with you guys, but be warned, I post around diversity and inclusion and I post around gender. So if you don't want that in your feed, I'm not the right person for you. And that's the way I view LinkedIn. When I accept people's connections, when I'm connecting with others, will they be interested in my content? So think about, keeping LinkedIn a little bit like a closed door to a certain extent, because also you'll get people approach you. Can you connect me with this person? And that's always a bit of a difficult ask, because your integrity goes with every connection that you make. So, get to know people a little bit better. So other things on LinkedIn, I mean, now it's like a little microsite, right? You can indulge in blogs, videos, all sorts of things, upload documents, and it's a fantastic place to share content and to learn. But, don't go off and join loads and loads of groups if you're not getting any value out of them. They're just going to clog your feed. I could go on and talk to you about lots of other social media. I think Twitter's the next second place from a business perspective. I follow all of my clients. I couldn't buy a newspaper like the people that I follow from a LinkedIn perspective, from a Twitter perspective. I'm getting thought leadership, sound bites about my clients when I go onto calls. Oh, I saw this in the news. Hopefully it's positive. But it's a real education. And I just kind of, I have to use it for my businesses, but, I do use it in terms of building my knowledge. And I think it's something like 65% of people on Twitter have never tweeted in their life. They're just consumers. So and that's fine. But it's a very, very good place to business. It can be a little bit negative at times, when you get into Twitter brawls, but I've always kind of checked what's trending on Twitter before I check any of my news feeds. You have to have your fake news glasses on a bit, but generally if it's trending, something's going on somewhere. So again, a good tool. Now I could chat to you about Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, all of the other kind of channels. I don't necessarily feel they're work channels, or they're not yet. But I definitely think the other two are. But one of the things I would say to you, if you're on any of those other channels, people are tagging you in, even if it's a funny TikTok video, might be great. Like, I'm not condemning that at all. But if I find you, it's all building a picture of kind of who you are. So just think about what you put on your socials, your security settings, even leaving your wall open in Facebook, people tagging you into pictures without your permission. I might find that. And I might make kind of an assumption based on what I see. So protect your brand and think about when other people have it, because they won't be as protective about your brand as what you will. So, just things to think about. And the social media channels, again, They're great, let's have them, but I'd rather you do one or two and do them really well, and kind of keep the work and personal stuff separate. At the end of the day, we represent the brands that we work for. If we're getting a pay packet at the end of every month, we have to be a little bit careful around what we put on socials. There's nothing a journalist loves better than trailing through somebody's social accounts that works for a company they're about to expose in a news article. So, protect the company as if you would yourself. It's the right thing to do. So other things, network relationships, we need people. We won't get ahead on our own. How do we build them? So obviously in the real world, when we're back to normal, I'd encourage you, go to 1, 2 events, and don't just hang out at events that are with your industry. Go hang out with the engineers, the space people, the entrepreneurs, like all these different groups. There are so many across the world of these networking groups that you can go, and you'll pick up amazing bits of information. You'll make amazing connections. And it's just about investing a little bit of time in building your network. Please don't become trapped in doing the doing and sitting at your desk and thinking busy will get you ahead, because it won't. So things that you will pick up from a networking perspective, and I can give you loads of kind of, tips about breaking into a conversation when you walk in a room and it looks really daunting, going for people where there's 3 because there's always one spare. When you want to leave a conversation, saying I'm going to the ladies or gents is not the answer. Doing the right thing and joining your partner up with another group so you can leave. There's, using your body language to, when you're talking to someone, to kind of pull your shoulders back so you create a space for someone to come and join you. There's loads of things in a physical sense. At the moment, as we're locked down, I think there's never been a better opportunity to network. There are so many virtual events. I see them on Twitter, Eventbrite, they're coming on all the different social channels for you to go and meet people. And I think it's taken away that awkwardness of the people that don't want to walk in the room. Not everyone is a natural networker. For introverts, it's a nightmare for them, to be in that room and be forced to connect with other people. But I would say to the introverts that are on the call, even one conversation, one follow up is a massive achievement. Even there are some rooms I've walked in where it's got 5,000 people in the room and I wouldn't know where to start. So, start your networking. If you feel uncomfortable, go with a friend, but just don't stay with a friend. That's a wasted opportunity on your part. But use this time while we're still in lockdown and things are coming out to reach out to people. People are a lot more engaging to have a quick 5-minute Zoom or a quick coffee. It's not that people's kind of spare time is accessibility time, but you'll be surprised, the people that will give you some time if they have it. So networking, think about internal events. What can I go to? External events. How can I build my network? How can I tag along with someone perhaps to a network that they're fully embedded in? But I would encourage you to do it. So other things, think about, I do this exercise every year called people planning. And I use this diagram for a number of things. I also use it for skills mapping. So if you look at this diagram, this is you in the middle, right? Not to stereotype with a pink dot. Around the edges, these 3 yellow circles, so the inner circles, for those of you who can't see color, you will see they are your circle of trust. So these are people that have got your back. They know enough about you. They'd throw their integrity in the room to get you an opportunity. Who are they? When is the last time you articulated to your circle of trust what it is that you want to do, where you want to go? Think about who those individuals are. The next circle, so the green, for those of you that can see it, these are people that you've worked with in the past and people that you need to reconnect with. It's really easy for us to lose those connections, people that we've worked with. And once it gets to a certain period of time, you almost feel uncomfortable to reestablish those connections. You can use me as an excuse for that. I went on this session. She told us to connect with 3 people. I connect with people, keep in touch. I send people little news clippings, articles, links. I saw this and it reminded me, we haven't spoke for months. How are you doing? No purpose, no coffee required or anything like that. Just keeping that relationship warm. The outer ring. So again, the blue color, for those of you who can see it, they are aspirational people. So people that perhaps heads of department, role models, could be speakers, authors, anybody that you really aspire to. How can we meet them? So even if you've done this once a year and you plotted 2 or 3 names, and we get to the end of the year and you've managed to see those individuals or meet them, is better than when we started. So think about your people plan. Now, I told you I use this for skills as well. So I use this in a different way. What are the skills on those middle circles, those yellow circles? What are the skills that I can give back? How can I help other people? Skills I have in abundance. How can I pay it forward? The next set of skills that I've got, but I need to hone, perhaps in a nearer term. So perhaps 1 year, 12 months, I'm going to need these skills in order to move myself forward towards a promotion in my business. The blue circles, so the outer circles, what are the strategic skills? Now I'm talking 3 to 5 years. How can I start that journey now to learn those skills? And then what you can do, if you want to be really clever, is you do a skills map and then you overlay it with your people plan. So how can, say, for example, if I had financial management as a 3 to 5 year skill, who do I know in my network that could teach me that? And then I overlay that with a person that could perhaps mentor me on that topic. So a really good exercise to sit down and do your own self-development, people and skills. That's how we're going to kind of get ahead. So networking, to finish off this segment, keep your relationships warm. If you've met someone, 48 hours, follow up with them. Always good to say where you met them. LinkedIn being the tool of choice, because people move around, they change, social handle names and stuff like that. So LinkedIn, a wonderful place to kind of keep in contact. I've got this thing, do it for that reason, but if I can help someone, that's my kind of go-to. Things will come back, as I say, as the universe kind of does. So networking, absolutely try to build it in. Where do we take the relationships now? So now I'm talking about coaches, mentors, sponsors. So we've got these relationships that we've built. How can we make them work for us? And this goes two ways. How can we give back, and how can we kind of receive? So mentors, multiple mentors, different countries, different backgrounds, reverse mentoring. If I think about my mentees, I probably learn as much from them as they do from me, in terms of enabling me to look at life through different lenses. Sponsors, and again, know the difference between these. Coaches, they're just going to pull the decisions out of you because you just cannot find your way to make a decision. Mentors talk to you. SMEs giving you advice. Sponsors, something we can't buy, we can't obtain, we have to earn it, talk about you. They're in rooms that you're not in. That goes back to the circle of trust. How do we get these sponsors? And again, sometimes they can start off as our mentors, because they're seeing us deliver. They know that integrity, if they threw our name into a hat for an opportunity, that we're going to deliver. Who are your sponsors? And if you haven't got them, how do we grow them? And the most beautiful thing about this is we can all be sponsors for each other. You don't need to be senior in order to do this. I could throw an opportunity in for you if I know you well enough. You can do the same for me. Get into that sponsorship mindset. It's a wonderful place to be from a leadership perspective. Just quickly on how to approach a mentor. So if I had all the time in the world, I would love to mentor every single day. I absolutely love it, but I don't have that time. But sometimes when people have approached me to mentor them, my first question would be, why me? What skill have you seen me demonstrate that you wish to learn? And sometimes people are not ready for a mentor. They haven't given it enough thought. They haven't thought about what's the skill that I need to learn? How long is it going to take me? How would I demonstrate in a mentoring relationship that, that mentorship has contributed towards my success? So if you're approaching a mentor, I want you to give it some thinking before you do that. Think about when you approach them, identifying the skill that you wish to learn, because that's what we want to focus on. So let's take public speaking. I'd love you to be my mentor. I'm interested in honing my public speaking skills. I've seen you do that. I think you're amazing. There's a little bit of flattery in there. Would you perhaps spend half an hour with me once a month over the next 3 months? During that period of time, I'll work out an opportunity where I have to public speak so we can measure success. So what I've heard as your potential mentee at that particular point, you need an hour and a half. I want to help you, but time is premium. I can give you an hour and a half. I know where we need to focus. I can send you links, books, give you tips around public speaking. That's what we're here to do. And as a mentor, all I want to do is see you get up on that stage and deliver and feel that you've got the confidence to do that skill. Give me a measurement of success. So things like that when you approach that mentor, give it some thought. And again, if you do the skills map, you can have multiple mentors for different skills. So you don't drain one mentor, because people are not always good at everything. As I say, play to individual strengths. So I'm just going to pick a couple of ones out of here. This is your career. You've got to drive it. There is so much you can do yourself. Don't wait for your boss to do it. They're also looking out for their own careers, doing their day jobs. They don't have the time to do everything. This is our bus. We need to drive it. Never stop learning, continuous learning. I learn every single day. Sponsor others. Think about those sponsors. Ultimately, you get out what you put in. And I would say to you, all of you, and it plays to a point that I'm going to talk about in a minute, now might not be the right time to do some of this stuff because there's other things going on in your life, and that's fine. You know, none of us, for example, you know, we may not be deeply ambitious at this particular point in our life, and that may come later because other things are taking priority. So don't feel like, you know, to be in the game, we have to do all this stuff because it can be a little bit overwhelming. I'm going to finish on giving back. It's the right thing to do. You know, we need to, as I say, help grow the society that we want to see. We need to be able to see, you know, the younger generation. We need to be those role models and kind of step up. I don't know what these red lines are, but they're just appearing on my slides. We need to, you know, things like being a charity trustee, volunteering for boards. And some people say to me, I'm too young to go on a board. Believe it or not, you know, charities are crying out for that next generation because they need to access future donations. They need to know how to do stuff well on social media. Don't take for granted the skills that you've got and the value that we could bring to schools and governance positions, you know, magistrate, public appointments. There's things like Sherry Blair's foundation, Give a Girl, you know, you can mentor a young girl all over the world, and there's loads of stuff. The Girls Network, you know, I can, if you're interested in that, there's some resources that I can give you. You know, I went off and joined a board, a male cancer board. And I was in the room with surgeons, clinicians, people from the NHS, and I was from the business. You know, I was from banking. What value do I bring here? But it was the ability to challenge the obvious questions that no one was asking. And you know something, being in that room, when I got back to my bank and I had to challenge things where I felt confident, it becomes so much easier. So, you know, there are other skills that you can learn. Just quickly, one of my mentees, she wanted to run a team of people, and she kept saying to her boss, you know, I want to be a man manager. I want to, you know, run teams. And he said, well, you've got no experience, so I don't want to give you somebody to manage. So they was in this circle. How can I ever run a team when you won't give me someone? So what she did, she went and joined a charity, and she ran a load of volunteer days, and she had so many experiences running volunteers where there was no hierarchy, they weren't paid to do the job, but she was able to take that experience back to her boss and articulate how she dealt with situations. And eventually she did get somebody to manage. She now runs large teams, but she went outside her organization, got the experience she needed, and brought it back in. You know, so again, it goes back to my point that this is, some of this is within our gift, some of this is within us to do. So what have I learned? And I'm not going to go through all of these because some of them I've said, but the plan and the goals, you know, please take some time out, sit there, no phones, no distractions, and think, what do I need to do? Where do I need to go? What does that look like? Other things, helping others, it's a given. Time out to think. I remember a coach used to send me up to a coffee shop to just sit and think. Took my pen and my paper away, my BlackBerry at the time, and I used to think, this is mad. Why is he taking all my tools away? But that time to think and let your priorities float to the top is really important. I'm going to finish on one point here. 80% is good enough. As I said to you earlier on, it's great to be ambitious. It's great to be fantastic at your job. However, your mental health and your well-being is equally important. 80% do what you do and do it well. Please save 20% for yourself. You know, there are times when I reflect on my own career, things that I was supposed to go to where the job came first and stuff like that, and I can't get those times back. You know, so listen out for the little warnings in your body when you're overworking and doing too much. You know, you can take some time out, it'll all be there waiting for you when you get back. So I'm going to finish off on there, and I'm just going to ask you, what's your plan? What have you taken away from this session? And if it's update your LinkedIn, I'm going to be cross, right? Because there's more to it than that. But I'd hope that you can take action. I hope this has inspired you and motivated you to kind of go and make a change, drive your own bus. That's what I would say. So thank you very much. I know I'm right up to time. So if any of you need to drop off, I won't be offended. But if you want to hang on and we can do some questions, I don't know what's in the chat group, Edema, but I can definitely have a look if I stop sharing. But yeah, talk to me.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That was absolutely awesome. And I feel like everyone at Team BLIX and everyone that's participated today feels the same way. So we're just going to quickly move on to Q&As if that's okay. And we have a few in the chat box at the moment. So I'll just pick the three, just the interest of time. So the first one that we have is, by Yvonne. So brilliant presentation, Vanessa. Thanks for sharing the great advice. How has your purpose guided you throughout your career? What has been more impactful through your career, and has it been through mentorship or sponsorship?
So I'd say my purpose really came a bit later in my career. You know, I had this niggling voice inside me that I wanted to do more in terms of kind of legacy, kids, bringing other people on. And I think that was my own reflection that I hadn't done enough of it because I've been so embedded in my own journey. You know, I felt quite selfish for that aspect, although it was kind of only the first 25 years. But I'd say my purpose definitely drives me now. You know, I need to wake up every day knowing that I've made a difference, regardless of how small that is. You know, and that's a difference in many different senses. I would say the development of my career has probably been more through sponsorship, and that's why I'm such a big advocate. Mentorship has definitely helped me, you know, given me advice. That sounding board is invaluable. But the sponsorship, it was individuals that really took a bit of a chance on me when I didn't necessarily tick all the boxes, and they gave me an opportunity, knowing that, you know, I kind of went into some of the jobs that I took punching a little bit above my weight, thinking, oh, I'll learn as I go. But also having leaders that knew that I may fall over, and if I did, they was there to pick me up. So I think that goes down to building strong relationships and doing your absolute best for those people that are going to advocate for you, never letting them down, always giving them an extra 20%. If they ask you to do something, you think ahead of time, okay, I'm going to deliver that back, but I'm going to add a little something extra on top. So I definitely think the sponsorship side has very much kind of helped me where I am, which is why I'm so kind of pay that forward, because I know the benefits that that gave me. And I know that, again, we can all do that for each other.
That was incredible, Vanessa. Thank you so much for an awesome answer. So, just another one by Christopher, which was, hey, Vanessa, when did you feel that you were ready to be a mentor?
Do you know something? And I get asked this question a lot. Every single one of you are ready. You know, all of you are role models to someone. Don't ever forget that. You know, the young kid that's 10 or 11, you know, the person that looks and sounds like you, we're all role models. As long as you've got, you know, the ability to listen, I think that's really important, because you want to, you're listening to the person and working out how you can help them. And it may well be that you can't help them, but you know someone that can. That's equally a mentor's job, that they can pass them on to other people within their network that may be able to fill the gaps that you can't. I think, you know, if you're feeling a little bit nervous with it, look at some of the voluntary programs where you can go and mentor. Most of these give you a framework around how to be a good mentor. That's the biggest thing. Anyone can be a mentor, but being a good mentor, you know, is someone who listens, who offers advice, provides resources, points people in the right direction, isn't too judgmental, you know. So there's lots of different ways to be a mentor, but I think that's a fantastic way to start. But look at volunteering as a kind of first step, because then you can kind of feel the water, and then, you know, there's no end to when you can mentor. And also within your organizations, find out if there's any mentoring schemes for graduates or people that are perhaps the next layer down that are coming in, and volunteer your services.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Christopher's also very grateful for your answers. So, thank you for that. And again, just in the interest of time, everyone, we'll be able to do one last question. So, the one that I've got over here is by Adidayo. So, can you please share some tips on how to manage a team of diverse professionals and cultural backgrounds?
I think it very much starts with inclusion. I think everything that you do, you know, as they say, we'll never have diversity without the inclusion. It's around everything that you do, you know, thinking, almost going through the entire team in your head and thinking, how will that work for them? You know, I used to be in a team where everything was focused around drinks at the pub, whereas, you know, there were individuals in our team that didn't drink, you know, for whatever reason. So they were missing out. You know, nowadays I would call that out with with my management team, that how do we do things that are inclusive for all? So I think having that lens on, that inclusion lens, will, you know, by doing this, will we isolate certain members of the team so that they don't feel included? So I think it's also letting everyone bring their differences and visually respecting their differences at work. And I've seen lots of teams kind of do that, where they focus on someone's, you know, beliefs, religion, you know, all sorts of things like that. So that, because it's an educational thing for the people around them as well. And I think that's when, you know, we learn to have a greater understanding that we all come from different parts of the world, and that is an amazing mix to have in a team. And now that we can do that, so I would just say to make sure that you've got your inclusion lens on everything you do, every activity, you know, even when you're booking meetings, you know, at the moment, obviously, you know, there are certain religious festivals that are going on. Are there still meetings during that time frame when people may be fasting? You know, are we isolating, you know, people with children perhaps by doing 8 o'clock meetings earlier on in the morning? You know, and it is a lot to think of, but you will breed such a much better and stronger team if people feel respected in their place of work for whatever reason it is. So that would be my advice around inclusion.
This is brilliant, Vanessa. Thank you so much for the great energy and keeping everybody engaged. We've had so many people join and there's still so many questions. Here's a suggestion. How about we capture some of these great questions and we invite some of the members to continue asking questions. We send them over to you and post them on the website. Would that be something you could help us with?
Yeah, I've got my conference coming up. Just don't give me 100.
We'll consolidate the best ones.
I will get them. I will get to all of them. I make that promise to you, 100%.
Brilliant. This has been really fantastic. Thank you so much. Some great learnings. One last question. If you were having a conversation with yourself 15 years ago, what's the biggest tip that you give yourself? What's the most important piece of advice?
I would say to not take things so seriously. You know, when I look back now, everything was a bit of a drama. I don't know if it was just my younger self, and everything was overplayed, overthought in my head. And you kind of get to an age where you realize that life's too short to spend your time worrying about things. You know, as a natural worrier, I would definitely say that was one of the pieces of advice that I would give myself.
Just enjoy it.
Life's for living.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Vanessa.
More than welcome.
So Chirag, do you have a few more things to touch on?
Yep, absolutely. Give me 1 second. So just wrapping up on what's coming next. So we've got one-to-one bite-sized advisory sessions that you can feel free to book directly at blix.network. And this will cover so many different areas. And again, this is all for free. So please make sure you guys get involved. And again, these will be people from Google, Amazon, and DeepMind, and so on and so forth. Again, these sessions are free, and you can get your identity advisor sessions and then get them booked in via the Calendly link. And then you'd be able to organize that meet with your mentors. And this is all done through the blix.network website. And it's all for free. And lastly, just to wrap up, we've got our next event, our next knowledge event on the screen over here, and it will be hosted by Tony Effick, who is the managing director at Google and is the co-founder of #BlackandBrilliant. So please also make sure to stay up to date with all of our events and updates through our LinkedIn event, where we will have an event page ready and set up that you guys can jump into straight away.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sheree. And Vanessa, you know, maybe you can stay on. If you can stay on, that would be amazing. I know some people have to drop, me included, but thanks again. This has been fantastic. Lots of knowledge and nuggets to take away.
Fantastic. Well, I do have to drop, unfortunately. I've still got another conference call, believe it or not, in about 50 minutes, the joy of global hours. But please do send that over. Do keep in touch. So feel free to connect, reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn, just telling me you've been at this session. And I know some of you will probably ask me questions, not in a public forum from there, and I will get to them, I promise. But it's been an absolute joy to join you all. I think what you're doing at BLIX is incredible. You're under some really strong leadership there with Carol and the team that have kind of managed my end from this event. A huge thank you to you. It's been an absolute joy. Thanks again.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Vanessa. You're a superstar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thank you so much.